at the station trying to aid the abductors. So then, really, what are we trying to explain here? I think I would hope that the police boss, and he seems tongue-tied, you know, which,
you know, actually being honest that yes,
according to him,
they look like police, but believe you me, they are not part of our structure.
So then that would be very alarming, and it would be upon him and DCI and all the other security agencies to protect Kenyans. Because we cannot have an internal threat that is looming about and portraying themselves as police generally and conducting police business, because arresting is police business. We have such a grouping, or well, I don't want to call them an agency because that will be validating them, but you have a grouping that is out playing out and assuming police business. Then, as Wanja says, what should civilians do? Because if the police are not able to arrest the situation, if the police are not able to contain the situation, what should civilians do? That is the bigger question, and it's not an answer that we really want to have in terms of, like, you know, take charge of your own security and safety. That then would deteriorate the safety and peace of the country. However, there is one thing we must realize, that during a revolution like the one we are in now, there is a lot of nipping and tucking any voices that come out to talk against the regime. So they must also realize that Kenyans are very woke, and we are not blind to the happenings in the country. We just hope that it does not deteriorate, because at the end of the day, there will be individual responsibility and also organizational responsibility.
Yes. Bonafomba, and you talked about one of those special units that the president disbanded.
Yes.
During the campaigns, he talked about another unit, special unit of the DCI, that he felt was being used to target members of his campaign team.
Yes.
We've seen, and if you go back in Kenya's history, issues like special branch that came when dissent against the Moi and Kanu regime back then were high, especially after the '82 attempted coup. Are we seeing more of the same, that even the president has found probably use for special units to contain dissent?
I do not think so. I want to believe what the IG said yesterday. But now, back to him. I would like to challenge the IG to take up the responsibility to find out if the abductors who are outside the police structure, so that he brings them to book. Because remember, there was that aspect of one police officer in an individual capacity having abducted and demanded ransom of 150,000 shillings. So if there are several groups that are running such kind of operations within the country, are supposed to be brought to book. And that's the responsibility of the police. I do not think the kind of democratic gains we have made in this country, including the constitution that we have under 2010, I do not expect us to get back to the old dark days of like the Moi regime. And I think there are a lot of checks and balances right now that are provided for under our constitution that do not allow us to get back to that. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the police, again, I insist, to find out who is abducting the Kenyans and bring them to book and let them face justice.
But the question is, because containing dissent is not easy, and probably that's where these other extrajudicial ways to do so are being found.
I wouldn't want to speculate because I think we need to be relying on facts. And that's why it is the responsibility of the police to find out who is abducting Kenyans.
Police have already said it's not us.
They have said they are not the ones, but it's their duty to find those people who are doing that. Because Kenyans are looking for answers. The only way they can get those answers is from the police.
Okay. How else can an administration like this one contain dissent if it's not through such methods?
You know, you don't have to contain dissent. You cannot be at war with the people who elected you. You cannot be at war with your employers. You see, one of the things about this administration, and it's their worst headache, is that first and foremost, they galvanized and raised the hope of the majority, who are the people in the low, at the bottom of the pyramid, if I were to use that phrase. Mama mboga, watu wa bodaboda, mavijana. So they whipped their emotions and raised a lot of hopes when they were coming to the government. We also know that their win, you know, in the 2020 election was hotly and heavily contested. Therefore, their dissent did not start with the Gen Zs. You remember the Azimio Maandamano that started immediately almost thereafter. And we also saw a lot of excessive force. There was a time when the journalists were tear gassed inside of their journalist vehicle. You know, there were a lot of injuries. There was a time even opposition leaders were harassed. You could tell that this has been on an upward trajectory. But then again, you know, the numbers, just in the same breath, I think this week, there was also a report from this same, our security, that since August, 339 people have been found dead. Mm-hmm. There was also another DCA report that around 97 women have been found dead somewhere. However, they were quick to add that we don't have a femicide problem. Still, a lot of things that are quite scary, if you ask me. You know, it's not every day that you wake up and when you're reading your newspaper, you hear that there was an individual who boiled the bones of an individual. You know, those stories, you know, you struggle to reconcile. You know, a mother and the two daughters, as in the case of Isli. You know, I remember there was a political joke that was all over when people were asking, in whose hands are we safe? And that's what really I'd love to ask. And I just wish to encourage them that when you don't contain dissent using these old and orthodox means like getting our contact information from our telcos, who should actually be held accountable anyway. And now, compared to the days you have told us about, the days of the dark days of Moi regime, where people were really harassed, opposition leaders were arrested and harmed. You know, you remember the cases of Matiba and all others. Now, in the age of technology, how do you contain dissent when all I need is to put a hashtag, Occupy Standard Chat Marathon, Occupied Town, Occupy Parliament, Occupy here and there? In the age of technology, in the age where freedom of speech and freedom of expression is high, and even I remember these foreign ambassadors and diplomats, recently they enjoined around 15 embassies and countries, and they told the government these issues of abductions and, you know, and kidnappings are on the high. They even told them, remember, even Kenya now is a member of the UN human rights body. So when you see the gains we are making at the international level, and yet on the ground people are still appearing missing. On the ground, these activists like, you know, Boniface Mwangi is abducted at the full glare of his own children. You remember Alfred Ketel, where the children were crying in the car. Then you even ask yourself, even as we say that we are an independent country, a sovereign country, Kenya is moving forward, in the global community we are seen as a country that does not respect human rights. You know, if the international media is covering literally a Gen Z being shot outside of the parliament, you ask yourself, who are these other people with guns if someone has a bullet wound? So the opposition has also speculated that there could be some sort of a group that is formed to deal with dissent, as Fuaba says, maybe outside of the police force, as it were. If it's there, then you ask yourself, what is this that they are so uncomfortable with their Kenyans expressing themselves and their dissatisfaction? The
front page of the Standard goes with these screaming headlines: abductions puzzle as police say it wasn't us. So if it wasn't police, then who? That's a big question we're asking this morning. And yes, the issue of abductions and disappearances of many Kenyans still continue to make headlines. I want us now to move on to a different topic, and this is on the issue of counties and the funding for counties. Habari kuu pale kwenye ukurasa wa mbele wa Taifa Leo inasema county kumekauka. Sema county za kauka, hatua za hazina kuu kuchelewa kutuma mgao wa county ya kuhamisha huduma. Nasema wafanyakazi wa serikali za county kote nchini wanakabiliwa na wakati mgumu baada ya kuchelewa kulipwa mishahara kwa miezi kadhaa. Chanzo kikuu cha masaibu hayo ni uhaba wa pesa uliosababishwa na mgao wa kila mwezi wa county kutoka hazina ya kitaifa kuchelewa kutolewa. So delays in disbursement of county allocations by Treasury is what is leading to this. It is also on a different angle to it, is on the Standard. Highlight there on the front page, but the story is on page 10, where there's a standoff between MPs and senators on county billions and a disagreement on the county allocation, which is a different discussion. But on this issue of county allocations, this is 14 years later since we promulgated this constitution. It would appear that things were going very well. What is so different now? Is it that fiscal situation cannot or can no longer sustain devolution?
I think devolution can be sustained. That's the underlying the key issue for me. But what I'm looking at is that I'm seeing a stifling on really rolling out devolution. Because remember, function was to be followed by resources. We've continued to be in this crisis of, so we have devolved some function, but the government, the national government, does not disburse the resources accordingly. For me, it's an issue of leadership. It is more an issue of lack of strategy, because we must realize that when we promulgated this new constitution, we envisioned that we are going to have the county administrations. So there will be the county government and the national government. Why is it so hard for the government to assume its full function, number one, of offering a better public policy, just through making that the systems are working? The alliance between the collaboration between the national and the county government should have taken front space in terms of deliberating on which counties, especially when it comes to the allocation of resources. What are the key county issues that must run seamlessly? It is a question of leadership. It is, for me, it's less a question of fiscal capability or availability of resources, but more so on a question of leadership. The national government is not fully willing. There is laxity on willingness and from the national government to really collaborate with the county government. We have found ourselves in a situation whereby the disbursement of the county coffers, in a manner of speaking, has been politicized. So you realize if the IBEC, if the Council of Governors are not really warming up to the political agenda of the national government, then you start to see cracks and a bit of a disarray in terms of the now managing the whole national and county government relation, which in turn affects the provision of services both at the county, because you'll hear the county is not able to pay the doctors, they're not able to pay pending bills, which for me that is a national crisis. They are not able to carry out their businesses. You have people who are not being paid their salaries months on end. Why? And yet, on the other end, if you look at the national government, they are not only wasteful, but they are not committed. For me, it's purely a question of leadership.
Okay.
Yes.
But if at all that is the case, then where does that leave this issue of devolution? Is it at the whims of the national government that any leader who decides is not very comfortable with these devolved units can just as well inconvenience them?
Devolution was a very good idea, and it being entrenched in the constitution ensured that there is equity in terms of development. But now there's this other challenge, that as we devolved the units in terms of development, we also devolved corruption. There are certain elements within the counties that believe that money is supposed to come from somewhere and come to them to run the development operations, which is not the case. The counties themselves need to put more serious effort in on-source revenue. We've seen several counties doing that, but unfortunately the loopholes of corruption have really compromised our progress. There's this other aspect of IBEC, now the link between the national government and the counties in terms of financing. We have the new deputy president right now, Professor Kindiki, and we expect that with him in charge of IBEC, things are going to be different. Because remember when the president was at KICC the other day, he was saying that he has been very lonely in terms of decision-making, communication, and even running the country for the last 2 years. So we expect that the running of the counties and the coordination between the national government and the counties will become more effective now under Professor Kindiki, whom I think the country is very hopeful that is going to deliver.
And before I give you an opportunity, Wanja, there's a whole issue of the stalemate between the Houses of Parliament on just how much money should be allocated to the counties. Probably that is also informed by the politics of the day. There's a story filed by one of our reporters here at TV47 on this counties revenue stalemate. Let's watch that.
The first mediation committee sitting witnessed a heated debate between senators and members of the National Assembly, with each side defending their hardline stand on the proposed revenue share for the counties by both houses. But senators insist counties must receive at least 400 billion shillings.
We are playing from the home ground.
Despite co-chairperson of the mediation committee and National Assembly Budget and Appropriations chairperson Ndindi Nyoro lay bare the situation culminating from the lost finance bill, senators led by Nairobi Senator Edwin Sifuna read mistrust in the National Assembly on revenue matter.
And Parliament take a position and say, this is going to be the principle going forward. If there is a shortfall in national revenue, who should bear that responsibility? So that next year and the year after that is not an issue. And we don't fight about that.
Looking at the many counties that have been crying for pending bills to be paid on a butcher.
Members of the National Assembly have urged their Senate counterparts in consultations with Council of Governors to consider dropping the court case on road maintenance levy fund over what they termed as lack of goodwill while presenting their revenue issue on the table. The High Court has already extended the order freezing distribution of 10.5 billion shillings from road maintenance levy fund.
That whoever comes to equity must come with clean hands, come to this negotiation with the clean hands. The Council of Governors are not here with us. They're not coming here. They have not sent you to represent them in this mediation committee with the clean hands.
Even when you are mentioning this issue of the presidential memorandum, you are threatening us that we will not be able to raise 2/3 in both houses. Yet just last week, a few weeks ago, there was a grave matter here where raising 2/3 of the members of the National Assembly and the Senate was not a problem. Where have those 2/3 gone? No wonder the public are criticizing us, that when it is issues to do with us, politicians, it's very easy for us to raise these numbers.
As the light comes in the morning, Honorable Sifuna, is that without addressing the underlying issues, I am not. I am just being honest. Let me finish. I am not. I have been there.
The mandate is very clear. Confined to division of revenue, amendment bill as proposed in the National Assembly, passed by the National Assembly, amended by the Senate, and we have to find convergence.
The proposal to channel to counties at least 400 billion shillings was backed by Kitui Central Member of Parliament Makalimulu, though the question on whether the country is in a position to finance this additional 20 billion shillings after the Finance Bill 2024 was dropped remained unresolved. The clock ticks towards the 30 days given to the mediation committee. It's evident that counties will continue to survive without their share, even as the standoff between Senate and National Assembly continues. Elizabeth Mutuko, TV47 Palm Buildings, Nairobi.
So as the two houses of parliament continue haggling on just how much should go to the counties, probably should this division of revenue allocation be, the county revenue share be increased to 400 billion shillings, even what has already been agreed on is not being disbursed. There are serious delays. And one wonders, is devolution really a priority?
Is devolution really a priority? And for me, it's a resounding yes. You know, this issue of devolution, sometimes when people handle it, they make it look like it just started 10 years ago when we had this Katiba 2010. But actually, devolution, or what has been called majibo or majiboism, is a history of is as old as the history of the political organizing of Kenya. In fact, the history of majimbo and devolution and taking power closer to the people, and when I say power and services, obviously the money is also involved, is as old as the 1960s when we had this politics of Kanu, Kadu. Ronald Ngala, for example, is very, very much known for this issue of majimboism. So it is not necessarily a gift to the counties, it is a right to the counties. You know, when you talk about devolution, I've always looked at how this issue is portrayed, even by the media. It is seen as a contest between the national government, the senior government, you know, this budget committee and all, and the governors. But for me, devolution is about the people. You know, Fred, we have, for the last, I think, 3 months, Kenyans tumekuwa tunaongea kuhusu she, sha, shif. Now, there are many functions that are devolved, but for me, I've always been very big on health, number one, and agriculture. Even as we talk about the stalemate, as we talk about who is where, who has not been given, which parliamentary committee has a standoff. For me, what matters is that there is a certain individual in Laikipia, for example, who needs dialysis today. His kidneys cannot work. They cannot wait for this stalemate to be resolved. He's just going to die after 4 days or 5 days. Devolution for me is about the people. And you know, sometimes I feel like leaders, political leaders, are very much detached with the reality of Kenyans. And one would say it is because they don't consume these services. I mean, how do you understand the challenges of a health clinic in a remote area, yet to have access to the best private insurance? For me, I think devolution is an emergency. It's a life-saving component of government, and also obviously to cure. You know, Kenya is a country of inequalities. It is also curing some of the historical equities and inequalities. You know, sometimes even as we are in the city, we have access to the electricity and the good things of the city. We forget that Kenya is really, really big. Not too long time ago, I went to Laikipia. Once I was in Nanyuki town, which is like the big city in Laikipia. I was going to a town where we took 3 hours, still in the same county, somewhere in Laikipia North. And alongside that journey, I can just assure you that the roads, the water, you know, you can tell that the people who were coming to that meeting had to walk for really long distances. Now look at it as if it's a woman who was pregnant, who needed a life-saving drug in the health clinic. So for me, I just urge the government that giving money to the counties is not a favor to the governors. It is not a favor or a solution you make once you have held them, you know, you have called them to a conference. There has been a lot of debate, there has been a lot of conversations, but for me, I see it as a very big life-saving thing. And you know, Fred, now that when you were speaking earlier, you talked about these GMOs, and I think agriculture is also a devolved function. Now, these counties without money, as they are, you know, as it's reported. Now, how will they be able to actually, you know, manage and look at that issue of GMO, which is a very, really big issue, where some of us are concerned over our safety, for example. Yet it is a devolved function. Therefore, it is the counties that are supposed to manage that GMO in the kind of crops we shall be growing. So for me, I see it as taking us backwards, because it cannot be that since the history of Kenya, people have been talking about Majiboism and devolution. And we've seen major advances with the devolution. We've seen big hospitals. We've seen mango processing factories emerging in counties like Makueni. We've seen people solving their local problems. So for me, I think denying money is not denying the governors. It is denying Kenyans who need health, agriculture, early education.
Yes, yet we cannot ignore the fact that there are fiscal challenges, that the country and Treasury is struggling to even fund the budget. Yet we see attempts to borrow more and just to fill the gap. Part of it is what we are seeing on the front page of the Daily Nation, that the government definitely is going to look for this money somewhere and get it, whether through debt or through other means. But the problem is, it would appear even when the money is gotten, through whichever means, it is not a priority to fund the counties. Yet some of the crucial services we're talking about, including health and agriculture, are domiciled at the county level. Is it an issue of priority?
As I outlined earlier, Fred, it's an issue of leadership, it's an issue of priority, it's an issue of strategy. In my opinion, Kenya does not have a challenge of raising resources, both in-house or borrowing. Our greatest challenge has remained the utilization of the resources that we are able to mobilize and raise. Hence, you see, as you rightly say, there is a lot of borrowing that we have experienced in the last, let's say even 15 years. But when you do a matrix and try to weigh what we have borrowed against the development that we have experienced from those resources and the trajectory therein, because there is always a budget before you borrow, there is always a plan, on projects and programs that you're going to run. But what is the outcome? The dissatisfaction with Kenyans is that, and if you remember the last time we were talking about, the borrowing must be capped. Because regardless of how much we borrow, we are not able to translate that to internal resource. as a country. So when I look at the Daily Nation and MP is talking about, perpetual borrowing, it's alarming because already the budget that we have, 33% goes to debt repayment. Only a third goes to development because the other goes to the wage bill. So at what point will we stop really bleeding and realize that unless we are able to turn around our fiscal structure, our financial architecture, and really realize that it is only upon proper utilization of resources that we are going to, one, come out of the debt or manage our debt situation, and two, enhance our developmental agenda, which includes timely disbursement of resources to the county. Three, there has to be deliberate effort on making sure that devolution is working, not only on paper, but practically. If a function has been devolved, then it should be followed by resources. We have all state agencies, organizations, and departments that are charged with the devolution aspect of it. We have the IBEC, that's why they do the integrated budget. So why do they waste our resources as Kenyans coming together and raising a budget, and then when it comes to now implementation, there are hiccups. And yet we are still able to see that there are a lot of programs and projects that the national government is assuming and spending money that perhaps would have healed or the ailing nature of the very dysfunctional, devolved situation that we are in.
Okay.
For me, the administration of our President, William Ruto, must realize that any decision they make at any aspect or component of government, should it be a parliamentary committee, should it be at the IBEC, should it be the Council of Governors, should it be at the cabinet, it should be geared towards an improved public policy. Okay. The agitation we see in the country is not because of anything else. It is a dissatisfaction that has arose from poor service delivery, poor utilization of our resources. So no matter how much we borrow, we are not going to cure the problems we are having if we do not manage our resources.
Okay.
Yes.
Wanafomba, listening to you earlier, you seem to be laying the blame on the counties themselves that they're not able to raise own source revenue. Yet there's already the allocation in the budget. Isn't that akin to blaming the victim? That now, even if there's corruption at the county level, is it up to the national level to say there's too much corruption there, we won't give you the money we're supposed to?
No, there's that aspect of corruption in the counties. But again, there's also this national debate that has been ongoing. You see, this money that the counties need does not come from nowhere. And that's why the government is supposed to balance between at least three aspects: the public-private partnerships, the loans, borrowing either locally or internationally, and then there's also that aspect of us raising the revenue through taxes. On one hand, the wananchi want the taxes to be minimized. There are others who are even saying they're not comfortable with the PPPs. And then there's also that aspect of people saying the loans are too much. So the government is supposed to balance on all those aspects and also ensure that it takes care of the priorities. So therefore, I think it's a challenge on both aspects. In as much as we need to understand on the ground, the government is also supposed to be able to balance on those three aspects. And Kenyans also need to agree that the balance the government is trying to put in place is helpful to them. I see, like today's nation is talking about loans. When you have loans, it means you are trying to minimize the aspect of revenue. Otherwise, we'll be forced to be taxed more for us to finance national priorities, the whole budget, and even the
Isn't that the reality already, that the taxation levels or taxation measures have really gone up?
And that is why these loans, I'm seeing this one is like a screaming headline, but these loans are supposed to caution the mwananchi of being overtaxed, against being overtaxed. Just like the PPPs are supposed to reduce the levels of loans that we engage in. So it's a balance that the government is trying to come up with.
So definitely the government will get the money, one way or another,
yes,
through taxation or through loans.
Yes, the government will get the money.
Then why the reluctance to disburse the same to countries?
I think it's about national priorities. And as I said earlier, I'm hopeful that whatever has been happening right now will be corrected. and the government will be able to perform and help the monies to get to the counties. But again, my biggest challenge is about those counties that get the money and they misappropriate. You've seen all over the counties, there are people who have become overnight millionaires. They are misusing these monies. They use fake documents to get payments. It's all over here and there. And that's why we challenge our institutions also to be very active, proactive in dealing with the improprieties within the counties.
Okay.
Yes.
And as we conclude and as you make your final remarks, I'd want us now to focus on the issue of debt. Now this, what is on the front page of the Daily Nation, is a parliamentary move to actually postpone the coming into force of the debt threshold, which as a percentage of the GDP, which was to be capped at 55%. We are already at 70%. We're trying to reduce that and to contain it. But now Parliament is pushing for the postponement of the coming into effect of that capping, meaning that we could borrow more beyond the 70% that we are on, that we could go as high as 80%, and who knows where we will stop. Wanja, as you make your final comments, do you think that this is one of those areas where we are going against the promises that the Kenya Kwanza administration made, especially on debt?
No doubt that the administration has a big record on breaking promises and going back on their words. You know, when I look at Parliament and, you know, seeing this proposal by the leader of majority, Honorable Kemani Shugwa, what comes to my mind is just the basic, you know, the way when we were in school, we were studying GHC. They were saying, what is the role of Parliament, legislature, oversight, and representation. So I remember, even though maybe that was not my favorite subject, I used to know that that's where I can easily get my 1 point. The issue of oversight is really a big deal. And it has become very obvious now that every time our MPs unanimously agree on something, it is bad. The same way they unanimously agreed to impeach an individual barely 2 weeks ago. It seems like what is happening here for me is what some of us perceive to be having the executive having a lot of inroads in the legislature. Some of us are seeing this as the president and the executive having a super majority in the parliament where they shall just be passing things and getting blank checks on each and everything. So for me, when I look at such a blank check as they put it, then I ask myself, so what does it mean for now the counties who are already struggling with devolution? So all this money, where is it going? And some of us, you know, just out of traveling, there's no much infrastructural development. So you ask yourself, more loans, but it's not translated. If the counties are still always crying every other day and they look like they are begging for money, which is their rightful share to be able to do their devolution. So for me, I see that the members of parliament should just remember their role, which is to oversight. If the parliament will not be able to oversight and the judiciary are still, the executive is coming at them. You saw the other day when the judiciary was celebrating their 12 years at the Supreme Court, the deputy president, Kidiki Kithure, started a conversations around which one supersedes the other, the national interest or the public interest. And some of us were, the law is very clear. It is about the people. So if they start these conversations of trying, introducing new debates,